Hi there, it's Deborah Irene with Story Time. For the past year or more, I've been reading to you from my mother's book, Helen's Heritage, and we've been reading stories at the back of her book about her siblings. She was the youngest of 16, and we only have two left to read about. And so I thought today would be a good day to pick up one more story and let you hear about her brother Carl. And so let me show you first a picture of Carl. There are several pictures there of him. One is a younger boy, one in his military uniform. He spent, I believe, 8 years in the military. We'll read here in a minute what my mother had to say about that. And then one with his wife, Mary Lou. Again, we're reading from my mother's book, Helen's Heritage. This is her voice speaking and not me. Carl Eugene was his name. Carl Eugene was born on December 14, 1929, the 14th child and 7th son. He was the grandest thing and grew into one of the most handsome men in our family. Over 6 feet tall, 190 pounds, dark hair and light eyes. Some thought he looked like Clark Gable. He was 4 years older than I, and for most of my childhood was my oldest brother living in our home. I looked up to him as my protector and the boss. Needless to say, we were close. Our love for each other was unconditional. He was allowed to go live with Mama as a teenager during the time she was married to Mr. Taft. Mr. Taft had a son about the same age, and they all got along well. He stayed for a couple of years until he went into the service. He came back to Missouri for a brief period and then entered the Army. He was a veteran of the Korean War era. When he enlisted, Robert worried about his probable deployment to Korea. Robert wanted to go in Carl's place because he felt since he had already dealt with the dangers and challenges of a soldier, he could handle the potential hardship better than Carl. As it turned out, Carl spent most of his military years in Germany. He loved Germany and probably would have made a career in the military, but it was time for him to return to the States, so he did not re-enlist. I believe he was in for 8 years. His buddies called him Herb. We exchanged letters regularly when he was in Germany. After I had moved to California to live with Mama, I sent Carl a picture I had taken in Santa Paula, the one on the front cover of this book. That's the picture she's talking about. He took the black and white picture and had it color tinted. He showed it to me when he returned. I was amazed that he matched the colors correctly. Of course, he knew the color of my hair and eyes, but he didn't have a clue about my jewelry. And it was turquoise and crystal. And you can't tell because this is a black and white picture of it. After returning from Germany, he married a lady we called Dot from Georgia. They visited in Missouri and had one daughter named after Carl, Frances Eugenia, who died right after birth. The marriage ended shortly thereafter, and he returned to Germany, where he stayed another 3 years. He spent a lot of time at my home when he returned. He loved my girls. One time he spent all day putting together a dollhouse for Kathy. This was just one little thing of many. It was good to have him around. Sadly, Carl was not in good health. He was diagnosed with a terminal blood disease that attacked his liver. He told me this when I drove him home from a doctor's appointment in Ventura. He confessed that his alcoholism was contributing to his condition. We talked on that trip home about how I needed to quit smoking and how he needed to quit drinking. He also told me that his baby, Eugene, had a blood issue as well, and that he should never father another child. His health was ruined, and by the end of his young life, he had cirrhosis of the liver. He married a very loving lady in California, Mary Lou Escondido, who stood by his side until the day he died. Carl and I had many good talks the last couple of years of his life. During one of our talks, just a couple of months before he died, I thanked him for taking care of me and helping me when I was a kid, for all of the things he did. Humbly, he said, "Well, sis, it's because I was there. If any of the other boys would have been there, they would have done the same thing." I said, "Yes, but they weren't there, and you were." My last baby, Karen, was 4 months old the last time he visited our home. He came to see her and loved on her. He died the month after that visit. Dad was visiting us from Missouri at the time. Carl went into a coma at home. The doctor confirmed he was dying. Mary Lou was very upset, and I insisted to the doctor that they admit him to a hospital. I said he doesn't need to die here. So they took him by ambulance to the hospital in Ventura, where he lived a few days. Dad, Betty, my niece Mel's daughter, and I went to see him. As we got on the elevator, Betty recognized a minister and asked him if he would go pray for my brother because he was dying. He agreed and went to the room with us and saw Carl lying there comatose. The minister did something odd, pulled the sheets away from his feet and legs, listened to and touched him, and then prayed. Carl was bleeding internally. The doctor told us when the cirrhosis attacked the main artery that Carl would die. The minister said a prayer, and tears rolled down Carl's cheeks. Carl gave no response other than the tears. Without regaining consciousness, he died soon after that. We invited this minister to conduct Carl's funeral in California, and he mentioned this experience in his sermon. He reminded all of us, as long as there's breath, there's hope. I felt the minister's words, and seeing Carl's tears were a sign he had made peace with his Savior. After the funeral in California, Carl, in his flag-draped coffin, began his final journey home. Several of us made the trip back to Missouri for his burial. He died at the young age of 34 on October 20th, 1964, and joined many other relatives at Slagle Cemetery on October 26th. It was a whirlwind emotional week. Geneva stayed with my girls, allowing me to make the trip for his burial. I was thankful to have that time with my family and to be able to bring closure to a chapter I did not want to end. I had a dream sometime later that I was at Carl's funeral again, and that he raised up in the casket and said, "Helen, I did just exactly what Dad always told me to do." I shared this dream with Dad, and he replied, "Well, I didn't say anything to him in the hospital. I didn't tell him to do anything." I explained to Dad, "He didn't mean what you said in the hospital. He meant what you had told him all through the years, Dad." I knew what Carl meant in that strange dream, to do the right thing and remember your spiritual heritage. I had even more peace after the dream. We cannot judge. Only God knows what's in the heart. I believe that Carl's heart was right with his Maker. You know, I was thinking as I was reading this story, I remember Uncle Carl. He was a handsome man, and I know how much my mother loved him and looked up to him. In the early part of her book, Helen's Heritage, which that part is written chronologically, because he was the oldest boy still living at home. And she talks a lot about her childhood in the early part of this book. There's some really neat stories about him. So if you have the book, go back and read those. But as I was reading what she wrote about Carl, and it is sad that he died at such a young age, but you might wonder, why did she speak so much about death? But you know, there was hope. There's hope in the fact that even though he was dying and he hadn't lived a perfect life, but he did know Jesus Christ as his Savior, and he reconfirmed that. And there is hope in knowing that as he died, that he made peace with his Savior and went on to see the Lord in heaven. Now, what I'm trying to say here is that it was very important for my mother as she told stories and she talked about each one of her siblings. This is very important for her to pass down to our family and to anybody else that's reading her stories, that it's not about perfect people. It's not about perfect people. But her stories and her book is about faith and family and forgiveness. That was the most important thing to her, for everyone to know, for our extended family to know, and for anyone else that reads her book, that it's not about perfect people, but it is about forgiven people and faithful people who believe in the saving power of Jesus Christ. She loved her brother Carl. And we have one more sibling to read about, so I'll come back in a couple of weeks and we'll read about the youngest boy, and his name is Harold. So this is Deborah Irene with Storytime, stories and lessons from my mother and from her book, Helen's Heritage, The Clan. I'll see you next time.